Hello, class. So we just got finished reading The Watsons Go to Birmingham, and we're gonna look at the different characters in the story. We're gonna name the characters, and then we're going to look at see what the characters did in the story, and we're gonna learn what different roles there are that characters can have in a story, and see where they line up. Okay, so the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna look at the different um, character types in a story. So first is what's usually called the main character, and they're usually called the protagonist, and that is the term that we're going to be using, protagonist. And this person is what the story is centered around. Okay, and the person who is against the protagonist is called the antagonist. And usually they are the enemy that the protagonist is going against. They're the main part of the conflict. And sometimes, depending on if the story is first person, second person, or third person, there might also be a narrator. And narrators only show up in third person stories because they are not a character in the story. They are talking about the story from a different perspective, an outside perspective. Okay, and there's also many different types of characters. We have the love interest. If the character falls in love, that the person they fall in love with is the love interest. We also have the deuteragonist, which is like the protagonist, like second hand man, they're friends. And then we have the antagonist's friends, and they kind of help move the plot along. And there also is the and that's all that we're gonna learn today. So we're gonna go through all the characters together and decide as a class what they think their role is in the story, and if there are characters where we don't know which role they fall into, we can discuss why they don't fall into a certain category, and maybe find other description or find other roles that they fit into. Because sometimes some characters are just the background characters and they help explain the plot and what the protagonist is going through. So they might not have a major role, so we'll talk about that as well. Okay, so now that we're done talking and identifying all the characters and their roles in the stories, we're going to talk about the story as a whole and the natural flow of the story. So, in a good story, they usually follow a plot diagram. Okay, so we're gonna draw one on the board, and we're gonna label it. Okay, so at the very start of the plot diagram, we have the exposition, and it is the introduction. Okay, we're gonna write expedition on the board and the definition underneath it. So the exposition is when the story is just beginning. It's usually the first chapter, the first page, all of the characters are being introduced, okay? And that's very important because if you don't introduce your characters, then the reader doesn't know what's going on in the story and gets confused. Okay, so after the introduction, we have the rising action, and that's when things start to pick up. Okay, and then they lead up to the climax, which is usually where the problem happens. Okay, when the protagonist and the antagonist meet up and duel it out, or a problem arises that causes the protagonist to take action. Okay, and after the the climax has happened, we have the falling action where things start to settle down after the storm. It's kind of slowing down. Things are getting towards the end of the story, And finally, we have the end of the story, okay? And that's called the resolution. And it's called the resolution because that's where things, the conflict is solved, usually. Sometimes if the conflict isn't solved, that's just where things level out and the story ends, okay? And so usually the natural flow of a good story has all of those points because they help the reader be able to follow correctly and easily so they don't get confused or not understand what the author is trying to say. And what a narrator does is a narrator takes the story and tells it from a third person perspective. And they might explain the natural flow of the story. So they might explain, like, this is the person's name, and this is what's going to happen to them, and this is how it got solved. So we have to make sure to remember the first person and third person's perspectives. So now that we're done discussing the natural flow of the story, and we also looked at how the story we read, The Watsons Go to Birmingham, where the exposition, rising action, climax, falling action, and resolution occurred for that story. So now that we all have an understanding, please let me know if you have any questions. We're going to start our assignment today. So everybody is going to get a writing prompt and a grading rubric, okay? And we're going to read the instructions together. We're going to read the writing prompt together, and we're going to read the grading rubric together, okay? So the writing prompt that you guys have, it's called Create a Story About a Time When You Had a Conflict with Another Person. It can be a sibling, parent, friend, anybody you had a conflict with. Okay, since this is going to be your own story, you're going to create new names for each of the characters, okay? So you got to be creative and come up with different names for everybody. And then you're going to create a plot diagram like the one on the board and a character outline like we did on the board as well, okay? There are posters around the room showing you what a plot diagram is and the different characters that are in good stories, like the protagonist, antagonist. If you need any help spelling anything or you want me to check your grammar, please let me know while we're here in class. And so let's take a look at the grading rubric. So the grading rubric is pretty simple. It's going to have grammar and punctuation, list of characters and their roles, which is that character list that you guys are going to create, like the one on the board, the plot diagram that you guys are going to make, and you have to fill it, okay, just like we did on the board with our story that we read. So in order to get full points, you can either get 3 points, 2 points, or 1 point. So in order to get 3 points, you have to have 0 to 1 grammar or punctuation errors. That's why I said if you need me to check anything, just bring it up to me and we'll talk about it. Raise your hand. You can also talk amongst your group. If you have any questions, you can read over each other's sentences and discuss and talk amongst each other to make sure that there aren't any errors. Okay, 2 to 3 grammar or punctuation errors get you a 2, and 4 to 5 or more grammar or punctuation errors gets you a 1 point. 1 point. So the second one, the list of characters and their role, I'm going to need a complete list of characters and their roles in the story, just like the ones that we created, or the one that we created for the story we read. 1 to 2, so that's for 3 points. In order to get 2 points, you have to be missing 1 or 2 essential character roles. Okay, you want to make sure you have a protagonist, antagonist. If you're going to tell your story from a third person perspective, you need to add in a narrator. And just talk to me and talk to each other. Just make sure you have a character for each of the roles that are on the board, okay? And if in order to get 1 point, you have to have 3 to 4 or more essential character roles not filled, okay? It's really easy to get full points on this assignment because everything's on the board and I'm here to talk. You guys have each other. So the last one is the plot diagram. So in order to get a 3, you have to have a completed plot diagram, okay? In order to get a 2, you have to have at one part of the plot diagram missing. There aren't many parts of a plot diagram, so nobody should be getting a 2 or 3. In order to get 1 point, you have to have 2 or more parts of the plot diagram missing. Okay, does everybody understand? Have any questions? Perfect. So we're going to, you guys can get started. Remember to come up, raise your hand, do what you feel like you need to do in order to understand and do great on this assignment. I know you guys are really creative, and I know you guys can do it. So let's make the outline for the story together. Remember, you're not creating the whole story, you're not writing the whole story today. Your assignment is only to do the plot diagram and make the characters and their roles in the story, okay? You're not writing the whole story today. Okay, you guys have the rest of class to do it. It's going to be about 30 minutes that you guys have to brainstorm. And just make sure you guys talk, discuss, but also get your work done, okay? I'll be walking around the room, and if you need any help or assistance, you want me to help you understand, if you don't understand any of the words or a certain word in the writing prompt or in the grading rubric or anything that I've said, any of the terms on the board, let me know and we'll talk about it, okay? You guys can do this.